The first stone split his lip open. Sheriff Kane didn't flinch. He stood alone in the center of the square, the white flag heavy in his grip, its fabric already stained by blood where his hand had torn against the wood. Another stone whistled through the air. It struck his cheekbone with a crack that echoed against the shuttered windows of the saloon. Pain flashed white behind his eyes, but he remained upright, boots planted firmly in the dust. A line of blood trickled down his jaw, catching in the faint scar that marked him from another lifetime, another war. Around him, the townsfolk roared like wolves. Men he had once protected, women whose children he'd saved from raiders, even gray-haired settlers who had whispered prayers while Kane buried his own wife and son. Their hands now clutched rocks and broken bottles, their voices rising with hatred that stung worse than any blow. "Coward!" someone screamed. "Traitor!" another spat. "White flag! Shame of a sheriff!" The sun beat down mercilessly, painting every face in the mob with heat and fury. Dust swirled with each stomp of boots, mingling with sweat and blood until the air itself tasted of iron and grit. Kane's steel-gray eyes scanned the crowd, searching for one voice of reason, one flicker of humanity. He found none. The third stone struck just below his eye. His vision blurred, but his grip on the white flag never wavered. That was the deal. That was the choice he had made. To raise the flag and spare lives, or to let the streets drown in blood. And now, the people he had sworn to protect were delivering judgment with their own hands. Hours earlier, the square had been quiet. The gallows loomed in the middle of town like a wooden skeleton, its noose swaying gently in the morning breeze. A boy no older than 20 stood beneath it, wrists bound, his face pale as ash. His name was Eli Harker, son of a rancher who had died years before in Kane's jurisdiction. The charge: murder of a drifter found dead near the Harker ranch. The evidence was thin, too thin. Kane knew it. No witnesses, just a knife buried in the drifter's chest, and Eli caught with blood on his hands. But Kane had seen that look in Eli's eyes, the stunned horror of a man who hadn't struck the blow. He remembered being 12, staring at his father's body, accused of cowardice for surviving. Truth and guilt never sat easy in this country. Judge Harland, a thick-necked man with gold rings and eyes like tar, had banged his gavel against the courthouse rail. "Justice must be swift," he thundered. "The boy swings by sundown." The crowd had cheered. They wanted blood. It was easier than facing the drought, easier than facing hunger. One death to satisfy their fears. But Kane had stepped forward. His duster caught the wind, his silver badge flashing like a shard of sunlight. "There ain't enough proof," he said, voice hard as gunmetal. "We hang him, we may hang an innocent man." The square fell silent. For a moment it seemed his authority might still hold. But then Harland leaned close, lips curling with disdain. "Sheriff," he hissed, low enough for only Kane to hear, "you've forgotten the law belongs to the people. If you stand against them, you stand alone." Kane's eyes flicked to the boy, to the crowd, to the noose. The ghost of his son's face wavered in his mind, pleading, fragile. He made his choice. He untied Eli's hands himself. That was when the first rock flew. Back in the square, the mob closed in. The boy had vanished, spirited away by a rancher's wagon in the chaos. But Kane bore the punishment in his place. "Raise your flag, Sheriff. Then where are stones?" shouted a man in a sweat-stained hat. They obliged, one after another, until the dirt at his feet was speckled with blood. A bottle shattered against his shoulder, soaking his coat with sour whiskey that stung in every cut. The smell mingled with dust and sweat. A baptism of humiliation. He could have drawn. His Colt .45 hung heavy at his side, pearl handle gleaming faintly in the sun. One twitch of his hand, and the square would empty in fear. But Kane stood still, his jaw tight. Law wasn't supposed to be a drawn gun. Not today. A voice rose above the mob, smooth and commanding. Judge Harland. He stepped onto the courthouse steps, his robe fluttering like a crow's wings. Look well, citizens of Dry Creek. This is what happens when a sheriff forgets his duty. He raises a flag for criminals. He shields the guilty. He spits on the law. The crowd roared in approval. Kane's badge glinted on his chest, but for the first time, it felt more like a target than a shield. He turned it slowly between his fingers, a habit when thought weighed heavy. Today, it felt like it burned. Another stone struck his ribs. He staggered, catching himself before he fell. His voice cut through the noise, low and steady. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me. For a heartbeat, silence. The kind of silence that falls before a storm. Faces turned, uncertain. Some hands faltered mid-throw, but Harland's sneer pushed them onward. You hear him? He confesses. Justice rides with him, not with you. He has chosen himself over the town. The storm resumed. Stones, curses, dust, and through the haze of blood, Kane saw movement at the edge of town. Riders, dark silhouettes against the white horizon, at least a dozen, their horses raising plumes of dust, their rifles glinting under the sun. Vargas's gang. They were coming fast, and the townsfolk, too busy casting stones, hadn't seen them yet. Kane spat blood into the dust. His chest heaved with pain, but his mind was iron. He had raised the white flag to save the town from itself. Now as riders closed in, he realized he'd been the bait all along. The last stone struck him square on the forehead. He dropped to one knee, vision swimming. Through the blur, he saw the bandits cresting the ridge, their war cries slicing through the afternoon air. The crowd kept jeering, blind to the danger. Kane forced himself upright, blood streaking down his face, flag still clutched in his hand. His eyes locked on the approaching riders, cold and unyielding. He whispered, barely audible, but heavy as a death knell. Justice rides with me. The bandits thundered closer. The townsfolk still hadn't turned, and Sheriff Kane stood bleeding, caught between a mob that hated him and an enemy that meant to burn them all. The mob's rage had not cooled when the sun dipped lower, throwing long crimson shadows across Dry Creek. The gallows creaked in the evening wind, its noose swaying like an accusation over the square. Sheriff Kane stood at the foot of it, blood dried along his temple, coat torn where bottles had struck. He'd survived the stoning, barely, but survival was not victory. The townsfolk clustered in knots along the boardwalks and porches, their voices buzzing like angry hornets. Women whispered with faces pinched in distrust. Men spat tobacco into the dust and muttered about weakness. Boys kicked stones, imitating their fathers' sneers. The people of Dry Creek, once proud to follow his lead, now saw their sheriff as something less than a man. The badge on his chest no longer gleamed. It weighed. He could feel its burden pressing down, heavier than the Colt at his hip. He had defended a boy's life with mercy. and the town had turned it into betrayal. Sheriff Kane saved a murderer. One voice carried above the murmurs, marked us all as cowards with that white rag. Another added, "He don't protect us no more. He protects killers." Their words struck harder than stones. Kane leaned against the wooden rail of the gallows, cold steel-gray eyes scanning the crowd. He had seen mobs before, outlaws riled by whiskey, soldiers whipped into frenzy, settlers driven mad by famine. This was worse. These were his people, men and women whose names he knew, whose dead he'd buried, whose lives he'd once saved. But mercy had no currency left in Dry Creek. Inside the courthouse, the air smelled of sweat, dust, and cheap whiskey. Judge Harland presided over the chaos like a buzzard over carrion. His girth strained the black robe across his shoulders, and the gold of his watch chain glinted each time he leaned back, satisfied. "The people have spoken," Harland declared, banging his gavel against the scarred wood. "This town was promised law, not weakness. If our sheriff will not do his duty, perhaps we should find a man who will." The room erupted in clapping, boots stomping on floorboards. Kane sat at the back, alone. He hadn't been invited to speak. He wasn't meant to. He watched his deputies stand near the front, eyes cast down, their loyalty already wavering. Deputy Cole, the youngest, shifted uncomfortably under the judge's stare. Kane had trusted that boy, taught him to shoot straight, to read danger in a man's eyes. Now Cole's silence spoke louder than betrayal. Harland's booming voice rolled on. "This town cannot afford a coward with a badge. We need a man who will raise his gun, not a white flag. If Kane will not serve the law, then let us appoint one who will." The crowd cheered again. Kane rose. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp enough to cut through the din. All eyes turned as he walked slowly to the front, boots echoing on the wood. He stood tall, though the bruises on his face burned under the lamplight. "The law," he said, his voice low but commanding, "is not the noose you tie around any neck you choose. The law ain't a mob's anger, it's truth. And the truth is that boy would have hanged innocent today." The crowd jeered. A bottle shattered against the wall behind him. Harland sneered, leaning forward. "You raised a flag of surrender in front of your people. You brought shame to this badge, Sheriff." Kane's hand brushed the silver badge on his chest, his thumb turning it slow as a coin. "Better shame on me," he said, "than blood on all your hands." A hush fell, brittle and dangerous. Deputy Cole broke it, his young voice loud and uncertain. "Maybe Judge Harland's right. Maybe the sheriff ain't fit no more." The words sliced Kane deeper than stone or bottle. Betrayal in the voice he'd once trusted. Cole didn't meet his eyes. The room exploded in agreement. Some shouted for Kane's resignation, others demanded his arrest. Harland raised his hands, basking in the storm he'd summoned. "Enough!" he roared. "Tomorrow we hold a vote. Sheriff Kane's fate will be decided by the people he claims to serve." The gavel slammed, echoing like a death knell. Kane left the courthouse alone. Outside, night crept across the town. The lamps along Main Street flickered weakly, their glow smothered by the wind. The saloon piano played off-key behind shuttered windows. A dog barked once and fell silent. The town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to break. Kane lit a cigarette with shaking hands, the paper crackling in the flame. Smoke burned in his throat, sharper than whiskey. He leaned against the post outside his office, watching the town that had become a stranger to him. His silver badge caught the lamplight. Once, it had been his shield, his compass. Tonight, it looked like a piece of tarnished metal. "Law ain't always justice," he muttered, voice rough, "but justice rides with me." The words gave little comfort. From the shadows across the street, an old rancher spat into the dust. "Then maybe justice ought to ride you out of town, Sheriff." Near midnight, danger stirred. A crash shattered the quiet. Kane's head snapped up. Flames flickered at the edge of town, barn roof ablaze, fire licking upward into the night sky. He ran toward it, boots hammering the dirt, smoke clawing his throat. Townsfolk rushed past him, shouting, carrying buckets. But when they saw him at the fire's edge, the line faltered. "Don't let him near," a man barked. "He'll wave another white flag and let it burn." Hands shoved Kane back from the bucket line. The heat seared his face. Sparks danced in his coat. The fire roared louder, eating the barn beams. Inside, horses screamed. Kane shoved past the men, ignoring their curses. He threw himself into the barn, smoke choking his lungs. Firelight turned the world into hell. He cut the reins with his knife, driving terrified horses toward the door. One bolted through the smoke into safety. Another reared, hooves lashing the air before collapsing in flames. Kane's duster smoldered as he dragged a third horse out by the bridle, coughing blood into the dirt. Townsfolk stared at him, not with gratitude, but with suspicion. "You set that fire yourself," someone accused. "He wants us to need him again," another shouted. The mob surged forward, fury rekindled. A stone struck his shoulder. A man's hand reached for his gun. Kane staggered back, smoke still pouring from his mouth, eyes burning with rage. He had risked his life to save their stock, and they repaid him with blame. He raised his hand, palm out. Blood streaked across his knuckles. "I didn't set your fire," he rasped, "but I'll damn well fight the men who did." The crowd fell momentarily still. In the distance, coyotes howled under the rising moon. Kane turned toward the ridge beyond town. In the flicker of firelight, he thought he saw horsemen, shadows watching from the hills, silent and patient. His jaw tightened. Vargas. The gang was closer than the townsfolk knew. He dropped the burned reins into the dirt, his badge catching the firelight like a dying star. Tomorrow the town would vote to strip him of the law. Tonight, unseen enemies circled like wolves, and Sheriff Kane, battered and alone, stood at the edge of his own gallows. Dawn broke gray over Dry Creek, the sky smeared with ash-colored clouds that promised a storm, but held back the rain. Sheriff Kane stood in front of his office, hat pulled low, coat stiff with dried smoke from the barn fire. His silver badge felt heavier with each passing hour, the metal biting against his chest like a shackle instead of a symbol. The night before still burned in his mind, the townsfolk cursing him as flames devoured a rancher's barn, their voices twisted by fear and Judge Harland's poison. He had saved what he could, dragging half-dead horses out of fire, lungs raw with smoke. Yet all they saw was betrayal, a sheriff who raised a white flag, then lit their town ablaze. Now as the first wagons rattled down Main Street, Kane could feel the town watching him from behind curtains and half-closed shutters. Their whispers carried on the cold morning air like burrs sticking to his skin. Inside the courthouse, Judge Harland played his hand. The man sat at the bench with his robe draped carelessly, as though justice itself were a costume he could shrug on or off. His voice rolled thick and commanding, filling the wooden room like smoke. The people of Dry Creek deserve a sheriff who serves law, not shame, Harland thundered. Kane raised the white flag. He spared a killer's neck. And last night, a barn burned. Coincidence or conspiracy? The crowd murmured in agreement. Harland leaned forward, his lips curling in satisfaction. This morning we call for a vote. Either Sheriff Kane steps down, or the people remove him. The choice is yours. Deputy Cole shifted uneasily near the front, his eyes darting toward Kane's empty chair. Beside him, Deputy Briggs, older, with a mustache hiding his thin mouth, nodded along with Harland's words. Their silence was damning. Kane's deputies, his men, were already slipping away. Kane entered the room like a storm walking on two legs. The crowd parted, but not out of respect, out of fear, out of contempt. His boots struck the floorboards hard enough to echo. The scar at his jaw caught the morning light, his gray eyes cold as gunmetal. He stopped at the center aisle, hand resting near his Colt. "You want me gone?" His voice was flat, carrying the weight of iron. "Say it to my face." The crowd bristled. Harland's smirk widened. "Sheriff," the judge drawled, "your time has passed. The people demand law, not hesitation. We cannot be led by a man who waves surrender while enemies ride our borders." Kane's eyes flicked to the window. Beyond the courthouse walls, the hills loomed quiet, but he remembered the shadows he had seen last night. Riders waiting, watching, Vargas's men. He turned back, his voice edged with steel. "Those riders you're so eager to ignore. They'll be here before sundown, and when they come, you'll wish you had a sheriff who knows how to fight more than shadows in your own head." The room buzzed, uneasy. Harland slammed his gavel. "Fear-mongering. Sheriff Kane invents ghosts to excuse his cowardice." Deputy Briggs stood. "Judge Harland's right. Sheriff, maybe you were the law once, but you've lost this town. Folks don't trust you no more." The words cut deeper than any stone. Kane had fought alongside Briggs against rustlers 3 winters past. He had carried the man bleeding from a gunfight with bandits, and now Briggs's loyalty was gone, sold to Harland's promise of order. Cole's voice cracked the silence next. Maybe the judge should appoint someone else." His eyes stayed on the floor. He couldn't look Kane in the face. Kane's hand curled into a fist. Betrayal from a boy he'd trained himself. The gavel slammed again. Harland rose, black robe swaying. "By the people's will, I declare Sheriff Kane unfit. Until a new sheriff is chosen, authority rests with me. Effective immediately." The crowd erupted in cheers. Some spat Kane's name like a curse. Kane stood unmoving, the storm inside him building. His badge caught the lamplight, tarnished and defiant. He reached up slowly, fingers brushing its edge, then spun it once between his knuckles. His voice dropped low, but every man and woman heard it. "Law ain't always justice, and when you put your faith in the wrong man's hands, justice dies quick." A hush fell over the courthouse. Harland's eyes gleamed. The judge knew the words were a threat, and he would twist them into treason. That night, Kane sat alone in his office, the lamplight throwing long shadows across the desk. The town had stripped him of power in all but name. Deputies no longer reported to him. Harland had men patrolling the streets under his orders. The jailhouse felt colder than ever. The iron bars rattled faintly in the wind, a hollow sound like chains in a grave. Kane sat with his Colt, laid across the desk, his fingers tracing the pearl handle. On the wall, the gallows shadow loomed through the window, stark against the moonlight. He could almost see his wife and son again, bodies swaying where the law had failed to protect them. His jaw tightened until his teeth ached. A knock broke the silence. It was Clara, the rancher's widow, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. She stepped inside, eyes darting to the badge still pinned to his chest. "Sheriff, they'll take it from you tomorrow." "I know." "Judge Harland's been meeting with Vargas." Her voice shook. "I saw them myself, up by the ridge. Men with rifles. They're planning something." Kane's blood ran cold. The riders weren't just waiting. They had allies in town. Clara's eyes brimmed with fear. "Sheriff, please, don't give up. Without you, there's no one left who'll stand when they come." For the first time in days, Kane felt the weight of something more than his badge. Responsibility, not for the law, for the people, even if they hated him. He nodded slowly. "When the time comes, you tell your folks to get off the street. Keep the children safe." She grabbed his hand, rough from years of gun and rain. "You can't do this alone." He didn't answer. His silence was the truth. By midnight, Kane walked the empty street. His boots echoed against the boards. His shadow stretched long by the pale lantern glow. Every door was barred, every window shuttered. The town was a corpse, waiting for vultures. On the hill above, torchlight flickered. Riders. Vargas's gang had moved closer. Kane stopped at the gallows in the square. He reached out, resting his hand against the rough wood. Splinters dug into his palm. In the silence, the creak of the noose rope whispered like fate itself. Behind him, the courthouse bell tolled midnight. Its echo rolled through the empty town like a warning. Kane's hand tightened on the rope. His eyes narrowed at the ridge where the torchlight swayed. The town thought they had stripped him of power, but Vargas was coming, and Harland had already opened the gates. The law might be gone, but justice wasn't. Not yet. The morning broke raw and bitter. Clouds dragged low across the sky like torn cloth, and the air smelled of rain that refused to fall. Sheriff Kane sat alone on the porch of his office, the wooden boards cold beneath his boots, his Colt resting on his knee. He'd barely slept. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the gallows shadow across the jailhouse wall, Judge Harland's smirk, the torchlight moving on the ridge where Vargas's men waited, like wolves circling a dying campfire. The badge on his chest gleamed faintly in the gray dawn. He turned it slowly between his fingers, the way he always did when the weight of choice bore down on him. But this morning, the badge no longer felt like a compass. It felt like a shackle. The law said he was finished. The vote today would strip him of his title. Harland would appoint a puppet sheriff, likely Briggs or even young Cole, and Dry Creek would bend under the judge's thumb. That was the law. But justice whispered something else. That Vargas was coming, that Harland's pockets were already filled with outlaw gold, that the town Kane had sworn to protect was about to be handed over like cattle at auction. The law demanded Kane surrender his badge. Justice demanded he fight. And for the first time since his wife and son were murdered, Kane wasn't sure which path left him with blood on his hands. The courthouse bell tolled mid-morning, summoning the town. Men and women filed into the square, faces tight, eyes hard. The gallows loomed above them, the rope swaying in the wind like it was waiting for his neck. Judge Harland took the stand, his voice smooth as oil. "People of Dry Creek, today we cast off weakness. Today we decide if our sheriff still serves the law, or if he serves only himself." The crowd murmured. Kane stood at the edge of the platform, coat dusted with ash, hat brim shadowing his eyes. Deputy Briggs stepped forward, arms crossed, mustache bristling. "Sheriff, you burned with us last night, but folks say you set that fire yourself. Brought Vargas's riders down on us with your cowardice." Lies. Kane's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Then Deputy Cole spoke, his voice trembling but loud enough for all. "Sheriff Kane once taught me the badge meant standing between the people and the dark. But when he raised that white flag, he stepped aside. Maybe Judge Harland's right. Maybe we need a man who won't surrender." The crowd roared its agreement. Stones clattered against Kane's boots. His deputies, his men, had betrayed him in daylight. Harland spread his arms like a preacher delivering salvation. "The law must prevail. The vote is simple. Sheriff Kane stays, or Sheriff Kane goes." Hands shot up. Voices thundered. The tally was never in doubt. "By the people's will," Harland declared, "Sheriff Kane is hereby stripped of authority. Lay down your badge." The crowd pressed closer, hungry for the sight. Kane drew the badge from his chest, the silver catching a shaft of sunlight as though reluctant to leave him. For a heartbeat, he saw his wife's face in it, and his son's small hand pressed against the star years ago, saying, "Pa, this means you're the strongest man in town." Then the vision was gone, and only the mob remained. He tossed the badge into the dirt. It landed with a dull thud, half buried in dust. The square erupted in cheers as though they had slain a beast. Men clapped each other's shoulders. Women smiled grimly. Harland's grin split wide as canyon stone. But Kane only stared at the badge in the dirt, its glint faint and fading. His chest hollowed. Law had left him. Justice hadn't. That night, the storm finally broke. Rain slashed across the town, hammering the roofs, turning Main Street into a river of mud. Lightning clawed the sky, thunder rolling like the voice of God. Kane sat alone in his office, the badge still lying outside in the dirt, untouched. His Colt gleamed on the desk, freshly cleaned, the cylinder loaded. Clara slipped inside, soaked through, shawl dripping rain. Her face was pale with fear. "They're coming, Sheriff. Vargas and 50 riders. Judge Harland met them at the ridge tonight. They'll ride at dawn, and the town'll open its gates." Kane's eyes narrowed. "You sure?" "I saw it with my own eyes. Harland promised them safe passage, so long as they leave him with the courthouse and the gold." Betrayal was no longer whispered. It was carved in stone. Kane rose slowly, every joint aching from years and fights past. He pulled his duster tight, holstered his Colt. His hand hovered over the door. "Sheriff," Clara whispered, "you don't have the law anymore. If you fight them now, you fight as an outlaw yourself." He paused, the weight of her words pressing deep. If he drew his gun tonight, he would no longer be the sheriff, just another killer with a badge long buried in mud. The law said walk away. Justice said stand and fight. "Law ain't always justice," Kane muttered, steel in his voice, "and justice rides with me." Clara's eyes shone with a mixture of fear and hope. "Then you'll stand?" "I'll stand." By midnight, Kane walked through the rain-drenched street. The badge still lay half-buried where he had dropped it. Lightning lit the square in violent flashes. He bent, picked it up, wiped the mud with his sleeve. He pinned it back on, not because Harland gave him authority, because the people needed a sheriff, even if they hated him. Thunder boomed. From the ridge above town, torchlight flickered. Vargas's men waiting for the storm to cover their approach. Kane's gray eyes locked on the glow. He touched the badge once more, then rested his hand on the Colt at his hip. The storm howled around him, rattling shutters, tearing at the gallows rope until it whipped like a live snake. Rain slicked his hat, stung his scar, but he stood tall, unyielding, a lone figure in the storm. Tomorrow, law would call him a traitor. Tonight, justice made him sheriff again. The rain eased near dawn, leaving Dry Creek shrouded in fog. The streets glistened with puddles, reflecting the gallows like a dark twin rising from the mud. Sheriff Kane walked the silent town, the badge pinned back to his chest, though no law recognized it anymore. Each step in the mud felt heavier than the last. He wasn't sheriff by vote. He was sheriff because he refused not to be. From the ridge, the faint glow of dying torches signaled Vargas's camp. Kane knew they'd ride at first light, storm covering their approach. He had only hours to ready a defense, if the town would stand with him at all. But as he turned toward the jailhouse, the door already stood ajar. Inside, lamplight flickered. Kane drew his Colt and pushed in. Deputy Cole stood at the desk, rifling through ledgers and wanted posters. His wet hair clung to his forehead, his jaw set tight. Across the room, Briggs leaned against the bars, cleaning his revolver with calm precision. Both men looked up when Kane entered. Cole's voice cracked. "You shouldn't be here." Kane's steel-gray eyes narrowed. "This office is mine until I'm cold in the ground. What are you two doing inside it?" Briggs smirked, slipping the revolver back into its holster. "Harland's orders. He made us deputies under his authority. Town don't need you anymore, Kane. We're the law now." Kane's hand tightened on his Colt. "You ain't the law. You're errand boys for a fat judge who sold this town to Vargas." Cole flinched at the words, but Briggs only chuckled. "Careful, Sheriff. You keep talking treason. Might be we put you in these very cells." The lamplight cast their shadows long across the floor, 3 men divided by the line between loyalty and betrayal. Kane's gaze lingered on Cole. The boy shifted, eyes on the floor. "Tell me it ain't true," Kane said quietly. "Tell me you didn't turn your back on every lesson I gave you." Cole's voice wavered. "You raised a white flag, Sheriff. You let the town stone you while you just stood there. What good's a sheriff who won't fight for his people?" The words landed like a bullet. Kane took a slow breath, scar pulling at his jaw. "I didn't raise that flag for me. I raised it to keep blood off these streets. That boy was innocent, and you knew it. But you'd rather follow Harland's rope than your own conscience." Cole's fists clenched. His eyes brimmed with doubt. "But not enough. The town says you're done. That's the law." Kane stepped closer, his boots thudding against the boards. His voice dropped low, rough as gravel. "The law's been bought. Justice ain't." Briggs's hand hovered near his revolver. "You talk big for a man who's standing alone." The tension snapped like a pulled trigger. Kane moved first, slamming his Colt's barrel across Briggs's wrist. The revolver clattered to the floor. Briggs cursed, swinging a fist, but Kane caught it and drove him against the bars, iron rattling. Cole shouted, drawing his gun, but his hand shook. His aim wavered, caught between mentor and duty. Kane locked eyes with him. "Don't do it, son. Don't throw away your soul for Harland's coin." Cole froze, finger trembling on the trigger. For a breathless second, the office was silent except for rain dripping through the roof. Then boots pounded outside. The door burst open. Judge Harland stood framed in the doorway, flanked by armed townsmen. His robe flared like black wings, his smile smug. "Well, well," he drawled. "Our outlaw sheriff caught assaulting his deputies. Proof enough you've lost your mind." The men raised rifles, barrels glinting. Kane stood in the crossfire, blood pounding in his ears. Briggs wrenched free, snatching his revolver from the floor. Cole still held his gun half raised, torn between two worlds. Harland's eyes gleamed. "Drop your weapon, Kane. You're finished." Kane stood silent, Colt heavy in his hand. He looked at the boy one last time. "Cole, if you believe the law's worth more than truth, then pull that trigger. But know this. You'll be shooting the man who kept this town alive long before Harland bought it." Cole's lips parted. His eyes flickered. The rain hissed outside like the breath of God. Waiting, but Cole didn't fire. His gun lowered slightly, though not all the way. Harland's jaw tightened in fury. "Coward, step aside. I'll finish it myself." The judge raised a derringer from his robe, the small pistol gleaming in lamplight. That was when a shot cracked through the window. Glass shattered. The lamp tipped, spilling flame across the desk. Men shouted, ducking. The bullet buried itself in the wall inches from Harland's skull. Smoke lingered in the air, sharp as brimstone. From outside came the echo of hooves. Vargas's riders had come early. Kane kicked the burning lamp aside, smoke curling. "Looks like the law's knockin', Judge, and it ain't on your side." Panic rippled through the room. Harland barked orders, sending men scrambling to barricade windows. But Kane saw the truth. The judge's lawmen weren't ready for Vargas's fire. They were shopkeepers and farmers clutching borrowed rifles, their courage built on bluster. Kane holstered his Colt, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You think stones and ropes will save you now? Vargas is here, and he'll bleed this town dry unless someone stands in his way." No one answered. Even Briggs's smirk faltered. Cole's hand shook as he stared at the door. Kane stepped into the smoke and rain, his duster flaring in the storm wind. The town had betrayed him. His deputies had turned. But the riders were here, and justice demanded blood. He pinned the badge tighter to his chest. The law was gone. All that remained was him. From the ridge, torches flared bright. Riders poured down the slope, their silhouettes jagged against the storm. Vargas himself rode at the front, broad-shouldered, bandolier crossing his chest, a rifle raised high. His voice carried on the wind. "Dry Creek, open your gates or we burn you to ash." Thunder cracked overhead. Sheriff Kane stood alone in the street, Colt gleaming at his side, badge glinting like a defiance no mob could bury. The storm broke wide as Vargas's riders thundered down the ridge, torches blazing like a fiery serpent across the hillside. Their shouts split the night, sharp and wild, carrying over the clap of hooves on wet earth. Dry Creek trembled in its own silence. Doors bolted, windows shuttered, townsfolk pressed tight behind thin walls that would not save them. Sheriff Kane stood in the middle of Main Street, rain plastering his duster to his shoulders, badge glinting each time lightning split the sky. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just waited. The gang slowed as they entered the square, 50 riders circling like wolves around prey, too weak to run. Vargas reined in at the front, a mountain of a man with a beard thick as briar, a rifle across his saddle. His grin was wide and mean. "Well, look here." Vargas called, voice rolling like thunder, a sheriff who waves white flags and townsfolk too scared to stand. Judge Harland promised me easy pickings. Guess he wasn't lying. Behind Kane, the courthouse doors burst open. Harland emerged, flanked by Briggs and a cluster of armed townsmen. His black robe clung in the rain, his face pale but defiant. "Vargas," Harland bellowed, "our deal stands. The town opens to you. You take what you need, leave the rest. But the sheriff, he's yours." Gasps rippled from the shadows where townsfolk huddled. Kane didn't turn. His eyes stayed locked on Vargas. "You sold them out," Kane said, his voice low, carrying in the storm. "All of them. For what? Gold in your pocket?" Harland sneered, his lips curling. "For survival. Law is order, Kane. And order means knowing when to yield, unlike you." Kane spun his badge between two fingers, slow and deliberate. "Law without justice ain't order. It's chains, and tonight you put every soul in Dry Creek in them." Vargas laughed, deep and coarse. "Pretty speeches, Sheriff. Shame they won't keep you alive." He leveled his rifle. The air went still. Briggs shifted beside Harland, revolver drawn. "Say the word, Judge. We drop him now and let Vargas take the town." But Cole's voice cut through, thin and wavering. "Judge, this ain't right. We're handing over families, children." Harland turned on him, eyes like knives. "You think justice feeds a town? You think Kane's mercy protects us from men like Vargas? No, boy. Power does. And Vargas has it." Kane's gaze flicked toward Cole, just for a heartbeat. Rain slid down his scar, mingling with blood. "You wanted to know what being a lawman means, son? It ain't standing beside power. It's standing in front of it, even when you bleed for it." Cole's hand trembled on his pistol. He looked at Harland, then Vargas, then back to Kane. His gun dipped slightly, but not enough to choose. Vargas grinned wider. "Looks like even your pups don't know whether to bite or crawl, Sheriff." Kane didn't answer. He stepped forward, boots sinking into mud, Colt hanging easy at his side. Every eye followed him. Every rifle shifted. He stopped just 10 paces from Vargas's horse. Lightning lit them both in stark silhouette. The outlaw king atop his steed, the lone sheriff below, badge shining like a star on storm-soaked black. "This town ain't yours," Kane said. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a hanging rope. "Not while I'm standing." The standoff cracked wide open. Vargas jerked his rifle down, but Kane was faster. His Colt barked once, the muzzle flashed bright against the storm. Vargas's hat flew off, the bullet carving a clean line through the brim. Chaos exploded. Gang rifles snapped up. Townsmen raised their own weapons. Harland shrieked for order. Horses screamed, rearing in the mud. But Vargas only laughed, deep and booming. He swung down from his saddle, boots splashing in the muck. He tossed his rifle aside, rolling his shoulders. So the white flag sheriff finally remembers he's got iron. He drew a long knife, steel flashing in the lightning. "Let's see if your justice bleeds as easy as your law." The gang howled their approval. Harland's men faltered, caught between fear and spectacle. Kane holstered his Colt. His hand brushed the badge on his chest. "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me." He stepped forward, mud sucking at his boots, rain hammering his hat brim. The knife came fast, a flash of steel aimed for Kane's throat. He twisted, the blade grazing his duster, his fist slammed into Vargas's jaw, the crack of bone echoing over thunder. The outlaw staggered but roared back, slashing again. Kane caught his wrist, driving the blade down into the mud, both men straining, muscles taut as drawn wire. Around them, silence fell. Gang and townsfolk alike watched. The town's fate balanced on two men locked in the storm. Vargas shoved Kane back against the gallows post. The noose swung overhead, creaking in the rain. "Look at that," Vargas snarled. "Justice hanging over your head where it belongs." Kane spat blood into the mud. His voice was low, steady. "Justice don't hang, Vargas. It rides." With a surge, he twisted Vargas's arm until the knife dropped. The outlaw swung wild, landing a heavy fist that snapped Kane's head sideways. Blood spattered the wood. The crowd gasped. Vargas grabbed the noose, looping it around Kane's neck in one violent motion. "This is what your law buys you," he roared, yanking the rope tight. Kane's breath strangled. His boots slipped in the muck, the gallows looming above him. The gang cheered. Townsfolk shrank back. Harland's grin gleamed, but Cole stepped forward, pistol shaking, his voice cracked. "Let him go, Vargas," the outlaw sneered. "Or what, pup?" Cole's hand shook harder. He looked at Kane, choking, eyes burning with fury, but unbroken. "Sheriff, tell me what to do." Kane's voice rasped through the rope, hoarse but commanding. "Choose law or justice." Lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled. Every eye turned to Cole. The boy's finger tightened on the trigger. The rope bit into Kane's neck, fibers grinding his skin raw as rain streamed down his face. Vargas's thick arm hauled the noose tighter, mud splashing with each violent pull. Kane's vision tunneled, his heartbeat pounding in his ears like war drums. The mob's jeers blurred. The gang's laughter echoed distant. Only one voice cut through the storm, Cole's, trembling, desperate. "Let him go, Vargas, I swear. Or you'll what?" Vargas snarled, spittle flying. His knife hand reached for Kane's ribs. "Shoot me? You ain't got the spine, boy." Kane's steel-gray eyes locked on Cole's through the haze. His voice rasped against the rope, torn and guttural. "Choose law or justice." The words hit like a hammer. Cole's pistol wavered, caught between his judge, his sheriff, and the outlaws who promised survival. Harland sneered from the courthouse steps, black robe soaked, his voice sharp as a whip. "Cole, think what you're doing. Shoot him, and you're finished. The law is with me." Cole's hand shook harder. He looked from Harland's pale, greedy face to Kane's bruised, unyielding eyes. Lightning carved the sky. The shot cracked. For a heartbeat, the whole square froze. Then Vargas staggered back, clutching his shoulder. Blood poured between his fingers. The noose slipped from Kane's neck. As the outlaw roared in pain, Kane hit the mud hard, gasping air that burned like fire. His Colt was in his hand before his lungs filled. He rose slow, eyes locked on Vargas, mud dripping from his duster, the badge shining through the storm like a shard of silver truth. "You picked the wrong town," Kane growled. Chaos tore loose. Vargas's gang shouted, rifles raised. Harland's men scattered, their courage breaking like dry sticks. Gunfire erupted, thunder answering each shot. Horses screamed, smoke and rain tangled in the air. Kane moved with deadly calm. His Colt barked once, twice, 3 times, each shot cutting down a rider who dared push into the square. Bullets sparked off iron railings, glass shattered from windows. The street turned to a killing ground. Vargas staggered toward his horse, fury blazing in his eyes. "This ain't over, Kane," he spat, clutching his wound. But Kane was already moving. His boots pounded mud as he closed the distance. Colt steady. Vargas swung his rifle one-handed, but Kane shot first. The bullet tore through wood and flesh, spinning the outlaw king backward into the gallows post. Vargas slumped, the noose dangling above his head like fate itself. Blood poured down, mixing with the rain, painting the mud dark. Kane stopped over him. Colt leveled. The crowd watched in stunned silence, every face pale with the weight of the moment. Harland broke it, voice shrill with fear. "Sheriff, arrest him. Show the town you're still the law." Kane's eyes flicked to the judge. The man's robe clung like black tar, his hands trembling though his mouth spat venom. "Put the badge back in the dirt, Kane. You're nothing without my word." For a long moment, Kane said nothing. He holstered his Colt and bent down, grabbing one of the heavy stones still littering the mud. Stones the townsfolk had hurled at him days ago. He turned it over in his palm, rain washing blood from its edge. Then he hurled it at Harland's feet. The stone cracked the courthouse steps, mud splattering the judge's robe. "You call this law?" Kane's voice rang across the square. A mob with stones, a judge with lies. A town that sells its children to outlaws. He looked at Vargas, slumped against the gallows, then back to the people. "You threw these at me when I raised a flag to save you. Now tell me, was it justice?" Silence. Only the hiss of rain. Kane's hand dropped to his Colt again. His voice dropped low, dangerous. "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me." He turned the Colt on Harland. The judge's mouth opened in a squeal. "No, you can't." The shot cracked. Harland fell backward, robe twisting in the mud, his gavel slipping from his grasp into the filth where it belonged. The storm raged, but the square had gone quiet. Vargas writhed at the gallows post, groaning in the mud. His men scattered like rats into the rain, leaving him behind. Kane stepped back, chest heaving, eyes cold. He holstered his Colt slowly, every movement deliberate. The badge gleamed on his chest, untarnished now by doubt. Cole stood frozen, pistol still smoking in his hand. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Sheriff, Kane cut him off. "You chose justice. That's more than most men ever do." Cole swallowed hard, tears mixing with rain. Around them, townsfolk emerged from hiding, faces etched with fear and shame, women clutching children, men with empty rifles. The people who had stoned him now stared at the sheriff who'd bled for them anyway. Kane's gaze swept the crowd. "You wanted law in Harland's hands. Now you see what that law brings." He pointed to the gallows, the corpse of the judge, the broken outlaw slumped in chains. "That's what you voted for." No one spoke. Kane turned away, mud sucking at his boots. He stopped at the gallows steps, looking down at the badge gleaming against his coat. For a long time he stood there, silent in the storm. Then he reached up, unclipped it, and set it on the rail of the gallows. Not thrown in the dirt, not stolen, left like a marker on a grave. He spoke without turning back. "This town don't need a sheriff. It needs justice. And justice ain't in silver or rope. It's in the choices you make when no one's watching." His duster flared as he walked into the rain, the Colt heavy at his side, the storm swallowing his silhouette. Behind him, the gallows creaked, rope swaying in the wind. The badge shone faintly in lightning before the dark took it. Sheriff Kane left Dry Creek as dawn broke. The storm spent, the streets washed clean but stained in memory. Behind him lay a town that had stoned him, stripped him, betrayed him, yet still he had bled for it. He thought of the white flag he had raised, an act meant to save lives, twisted into weakness. He thought of the stone that split his lip, the mob that cursed his name, and he thought of the gun, of the justice he had dealt when law proved hollow. The badge he left on the gallows would tell the story long after he was gone. Some would call him traitor, others would whisper savior. Both would be right, for Kane had walked the narrow line where law ended and justice began, and he had chosen the side that left blood on his hands but hope in the eyes of the boy who'd fired his first shot for truth. As his horse carried him west, the wind pulled his words into the empty land. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me. The legend of Sheriff Kane was not written in law books, but in scars, in storms, and in the choices no man could escape.